عليكم ورحمة الله. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى أهله وصحبه أجمعين، ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، ونشهد أن سيدنا مولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله. In the name of Allah, the gracious, the merciful, all praise is due to Allah, the Lord of the universe, the Master of the Day of Judgment. I bear witness and testimony to the oneness of Allah, to His magnificence, His omnipotence, His might, His glory, to His being the creator and sustainer of all things, the giver of life, the guider of hearts, the Master of the Day of Judgment. And I bear witness to the fact that Muhammad ibn Abdullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam is a servant and final messenger. May the peace and blessings of Allah be upon him and upon all those who choose to tread in his path until the last day. It is said that when Allah Azawajal was looking to see who would be His last messenger to this world, He looked into the hearts of His creation. That Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anh, he narrates to us in the hadith, Inna Allah nadhara fi qulub al-ibad, that indeed Allah Azawajal, He looked into the hearts of His ibad, He looked into the hearts of His servants. فَوَجَدَ خَيْرَ قُلُوبِ الْعِبَادِ قَلْبَ مُحَمَّدٍ sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and he found that the best of hearts was the heart of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam.
Nare takbir, nare risalat, nare risalat, ya Rasulullah.
فَاسْتَفَاحُ لِنَفْسِهِ, he chooses him for himself. And he endows him with the responsibility of being his last messenger to this world. And for us, as we commence this conversation, we need to be able to understand the importance of the criteria by which Allah Azawajal selects and chooses who will be the one responsible for all of our hearts. He does not look at locale, He does not look at country of origin, He does not look at culture, but when Allah is looking to see who will be given the station of being His last messenger to this world, a messenger sent not just to one people or for one time, but a messenger whose message is supposed to go throughout this dunya until the last hours in this world. He looks to see who has the best heart, and undoubtedly, this is the heart of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The heart that is endowed with the responsibility of guiding all hearts for the end of time. How could it not be the best of hearts? And so too, as Allah Azawajal looked into the heart of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, He endowed within His messenger an understanding to be able to look into the hearts of those who were around him, to be able to qualify whether or not they could be part of His ummah. The people of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's community were not all of his tribe. They were not all of his city. They were not all of his culture. They did not all even speak Arabic. The Prophet ﷺ came to move hearts, and he understood that the bodies that were attached to those hearts were not necessarily the things that he wanted to focus on. It was not whether the hand that extended a hand to his matched his in terms of color of skin. It was not whether the hand that extended a hand to his came from the same land or country as he did. The Prophet was meant to be a prophet for everyone. And he found within everyone goodness when at times others would not be able to see it. The Prophet ﷺ's movement was not about keeping people out, but bringing people in. And the most unlikely of individuals were given an opportunity to be able to be from amongst his followers, even those who no one thought could do anything on behalf of Islam. And as we get into the hadith that I was asked to comment on, where the Prophet ﷺ tells us to take advantage of 5 things before 5 things happen, where he speaks to us about the importance of harnessing our youth, our wealth, our health, our free time, and our life. We want to start here and think about not just how individually we take advantage of these things, but where it might be for the people who are around us, what is causing them to not feel as if they are entitled to be able to take advantage of it themselves. Where I come from in New York City, I meet Muslims from all backgrounds. Some people have very, very difficult lives. May Allah make things easy for all of us. I meet people who are stricken by financial affliction and anxiety. We see in the world today people who find themselves living only in conflict. We see individuals whose rights are not honored. People who go through a place where they don't know where they fit in and belong. But the transition from our time, from the Prophet ﷺ's time, was that he let everybody feel as if they could belong. And today, we don't necessarily embody the same legacy of our beloved ﷺ. We set up structures by which our interaction is very conditionalized and qualified. Who is a good Muslim? What are the metrics by which we look and understand? Who can do good for the community? Who can help us grow? What is it that we really look at? A person's dress? What it is that they go and they do? We see that this is not how the Prophet ﷺ assessed those who could work on behalf of his community. Umar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anhu was a man who many of us undoubtedly know the impact he had on Islam. A person who under his rule the Muslim empire expanded manyfold. When Umar would walk into a room, people would run out the way. They wouldn't know how to stand up to the ferocity and courage that was Umar. Before Umar ibn al-Khattab became Muslim, he was the staunchest of opponents of Islam. In his own narrations, he tells us of vices that he would engage in on a daily basis. Umar tells us in the hadith that he used to drink alcohol. Umar used to have a woman that was in his servitude by the name of Lubayna. Lubayna was his slave, and he used to beat this woman so hard, he would say to her when he stopped, "Don't think I have sympathy for you, I'm just tired. When I get my strength back, I'm going to keep doing it." There's a narration where Umar says after he became Muslim, he remembers a moment from his Jahiliyyah period. Something that made him laugh and something that made him cry. And Umar says, the instance that made me laugh, when I went out on a journey, I forgot my idol at home. And so I had a bag of dates with me, and I fashioned an idol out of those dates, and I prayed to it. And he said later on, I became hungry, and so I started to eat the idol that I had made out of dates. And it made me laugh because I was eating what I was worshiping. He said the instance that brought tears to his eyes, that customary at that time, people wanted to have sons, they did not want to have daughters. And so when they would have daughters, they would literally bury them alive in the ground. May Allah protect us from being people who dishonor the rights of our women. And Umar radiallahu anh, he says that I can remember feeling my own daughter's hand go limp in my hand. That in some narrations, I can remember feeling her hand whisk against the bottom of my beard as I buried her alive in the ground. And he said this made him cry. Nobody thought there was anything good about Umar. Look at the things that he did. Why would there be anything good about him? Umar on one occasion sees a woman by the name of Layla. And Layla looks as if she's going out on a journey. And Umar makes inquiry, what is it that you are doing? And she says, you have made it very hard for me to worship my God here. I have to go somewhere else where I can build a relationship with Allah. And she now expects abuse from Umar. This man who she knows drinks alcohol. This man who she knows beats Muslim women. This man who she knows did these kinds of things. And to her astonishment, he says, go and have peace on your journey. She goes home and tells her husband, a man by the name of Amr. And as she is telling him what has transpired, Amr says, what is it that you are saying? You actually sound as if you believe Umar ibn al-Khattab will become Muslim. She says, why could Umar not become Muslim? And her husband says, know this. The donkey of Umar's father will become Muslim before he does. Nobody thought there was anything good within Umar except the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And where everyone saw a reason to push down, where everyone saw a reason to say you are bad, where everyone saw simply what he did that was wrong, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam saw what was right. And he makes dua, Allahumma izz al-Islam bi ahabba rajulani ilayk, Amr ibn Hisham or Umar ibn al-Khattab. That, oh Allah, bring some izzah to Islam, some strength, and it's not quwwah, it's not power, physical strength, but izzah, like we say, izzat. Izzah is a strength that's rooted in dignity and respect. Izzah is a strength that is rooted in honor. Izzah, bring that to the Muslim community, Ya Rab, by the one of the two men who is more beloved to you, Amr ibn Hisham, who we know as Abu Jahl, or Umar ibn al-Khattab. And we know how the dua is accepted. That Umar, he becomes Muslim. He knocks on the door where the Prophet is with his companions, and the companions, they scatter everyone except Hamza. And Hamza says, let me open the door. Hamza radiallahu anh, just a few days prior, he took the shahada, he embraced Islam. And when Umar walks into the room, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam says to him, Al-an ya Umar. Right now, ya Umar, is this not the time? And Umar, the man who drank alcohol, Umar, the man who abused women, Umar, the man who buried his daughter alive, Umar, who was the champion of the mushrikeen of Mecca, who was the greatest opponent of Islam. He takes his shahada at the hand of the best of creation, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. The reality is changed for the Muslim community. Umar stands in front of one row, and Hamza radiallahu anhu stands in front of a second. And the people, they line up behind them. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he stands in the middle of the two lines. And for the first time, they walk out into the city with strength and honor. Behind Hamza and Umar, may Allah be pleased with both of them. Umar goes and knocks on the door of Abu Jahl. And Abu Jahl does not know he has become Muslim. Marhaba ya Umar, welcome. He is so glad to see his champion. Umar simply says, Aslamtu, I have become Muslim. And Abu Jahl says, La taf'al, don't do it. And Umar says, Fa'alt, it is done. Then he can't say anything. Because who will say something to Umar ibn al-Khattab? What if Umar believed what everybody said about him? What if every voice of every Muslim who is a companion of the Prophet ﷺ, who saw only what Umar did that was not good, what if Umar believed every one of those voices? And you and I, who are blessed to be in this city, we're literally on your street. There is masjid upon masjid. May Allah increase all of you in only that which is good. You want to think about how you will continue to grow and how it is important to keep bringing in people and understand that sometimes they will not be people who fit into what we think is a good practitioner of this faith. The Prophet's companions came from all walks of life. They came from all struggles. They had all realities. Whether or not we understand and appreciate the leadership and authority of an Umar ibn al-Khattab, we know undoubtedly he had a great impact on the Muslim community. And I want you to think to yourselves, I know we don't know each other that well. The only assurance I can give you is that I have a deep love for you. I don't come from a place where I'm trying to tell you that you are wrong or good or bad. I don't know any of you. But in my experiences, going across the world, meeting with Muslim communities, we have a tendency to be more people who push away rather than bring in. We seek to identify based off of where people are lacking, rather than giving them a sense of empowerment and say, no, you have something to offer. We take away confidence and self-esteem from people, and we let them believe that all they are is destined for hellfire. Whereas Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, with tenderness, with understanding, with compassion and gentleness, took the least likely of individuals and empowered them and made them the greatest leaders of our ummah. We push people away, making them feel as if they can't even enter into Allah's home. What do you think a good Muslim is? What do you think somebody needs to be able to work on behalf of the deen? What kind of things do they need to embody? What kind of skills, what kind of credentials, what kind of resources? How many Umars have we turned away because they don't fit into what we think they should look like or dress like or act like? How many Umars have we turned away because they are struggling just like everyone else is struggling to really be able to figure out what their relationship is to Allah? And how many Umars will we bring in to ensure that this community will make the change that communities need to go towards and keep growing so that this world can really see how beautiful Islam actually is? If you have found yourself in a place where you have the opportunity and privilege to engage those who are around you, don't seek to do to them what this world does to us. We find ourselves to be victims of many stereotypes, we in the Muslim community. Muslims are violent, Muslims are terrorists, Muslims treat their women poorly. People look at you and I and they see that our skin color is brown, that we come from Pakistan, we come from the Indian subcontinent. Their assumption is that simply based off of that, we are somehow second class or inferior. We don't like being stereotyped. We should not be amongst those who stereotype others. We don't like to be people who are victims of racism. Then we should not adopt the attitudes of those that we dislike. How many Umars are we bringing in? And how many Umars have we pushed away? How many Umars are we empowering? And how many Umars have we thrown to the ground? People are much bigger than one thing that we know about them. They have an entire life, they have an entire life experience, they have a name, they have a story. And this is what the Prophet ﷺ did. He understood the importance of engaging hearts and not just bodies. He understood the importance of knowing people and not relying simply on what it was that he knew and saying, that is sufficient for me to understand. Muhammad ﷺ had companions who were of the Quraysh. He had companions who were Arab. Undoubtedly, we know the stories of Abu Bakr and Uthman and Umar and Ali. May Allah be pleased with all of them. The Prophet ﷺ, his companions were also Salman al-Farsi. His companions were also Suhaib al-Rumi. His companions were also Abu Dhar of the Ghafar tribe. Arguably the only companion who was with the Prophet from the day he was born till the day he dies is a woman by the name of Ayman Barakah. Ayman was taken as a servant in the household of Abdullah, the Prophet ﷺ's father, when she was 16 years of age. She was an Abyssinian woman, Ethiopian. She was a black woman. She was one of the women who nursed the Prophet ﷺ. And she was there from the time of his birth until the time of his death. When Abu Bakr and Umar after the Prophet's passing, wanted to speak and remember about Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they would go to visit this woman, Ayman Barakah. But for our conversations, why is he bringing in all of these people? Why is he engaging them? Why is he giving them a sense that they can actually belong? Because that's what he's supposed to do. And as members of his ummah, and may Allah allow for all of us to leave this world in a state of Islam. And may Allah allow for our best of deeds to be our last deeds, the deeds upon which we will meet Him. As members of the ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we have to embody a similar sense of understanding. We have to be able to connect to hearts. And we have to be able to understand that the primary aspect in engaging another heart is looking into your own. The companions come to the Prophet ﷺ and ask him, Ya Rasulullah, which person is the best? Ayyun nasi afdal. And our teachers, they tell us that the companions were perhaps looking for the name of a specific individual, such as Yusuf alayhi salam, or maybe someone like that. But the Prophet ﷺ, instead of responding with specificity, he responds more generally. And so when the question comes, Ayyun nasi afdal, which person is the best? The Prophet ﷺ responds, Kullul makhmum al-qulub saduq al-lisan, that each one that has a heart that is makhmum and a tongue that is trustworthy. SubhanAllah. And the companions, they say, Ya Rasulullah, Saduq al-lisan arifuhu fa ma makhmum al-qulub, that we know what a trustworthy tongue is, but what is a heart that is makhmum? And in the Arabic language, when we say khamamt al-ghurfa, we're saying that he swept the room, meaning with like a broom. And when we say a heart is makhmum, we're saying it is a heart that is swept clean of any clutter, of any garbage, of any filth. And the Prophet, he alludes to this when he defines it in response to the companions asking, what is a heart that is makhmum? And he sallallahu alayhi wasallam says, هو تكي ونكي لا إثم فيه ولا بغي ولا غل ولا حسد. That it is taqi, it is a heart that is conscious of the divine, it has an understanding of the presence of Allah. It is naqi, it is pure, it is clean. That in it there is no oppression or aggression, and no bitterness and no envy. May Allah grant us all hearts that are like this. The Prophet ﷺ is giving us an indication of what it means to be someone who can really be that guide. You will not be a person who takes advantage of your youth before your old age. You will not be a person who takes advantage of your wealth before your poverty, your health before your sickness, your free time before you are preoccupied, and your life before your death, if you are not taking care of the heart that is inside of you. Because it is that heart that you bring to each deed and decision. It is the starting point of everything. And if you don't know how to engage it and be caring of it, you're not going to be able to take care of the ones that are around you as well. And then they too will fall into this pattern, where their youth will turn into old age, where their wealth will turn into nothing but the remains of this dunya, where their health will pass and they will go into a place of sickness, where they will go into a place where their free time becomes filled with distractions of this world, and their life will enter into another life which comes through the passage of death, because they never knew how to take care of their inside the way the Prophet's companions did, because of how he helped them to understand to take care of them. There's an Egyptian scholar by the name of the Nun al-Misri, rahimahullah, a great master of spirituality, known for his understanding of how to take care of one's inside. And the Nun al-Misri, rahimahullah, he gives us 5 indications, 5 actions that we can undertake to begin to deal with our own hearts. And so he says, in speaking about dealing with the hardness of one's own heart, إِذَا رَدْتَ أَن تَذْهَبَ كَسَاوَةُ قَلْبِكَ فَأَدِمِ الصِّيَامِ. that if you have a desire for the kasawa, for the hardness of your heart to go away, فَأَدِمِ الصِّيَامِ, then endure in fasting. We have witnessed a month of Ramadan just weeks ago. May Allah accept it from all of us. And you and I know, whether it was our first Ramadan or we had practiced and observed many Ramadans prior to it, that the reality of where our hearts are as we go through a process of fasting is something that we should not undermine. But there is great benefit, and we see ourselves moving forward in many different ways through this action of fasting. And the Quran tells us that the potential is there for one who fasts, that Allah has written it for us. كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الصِّيَامِ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ, so that you could have that consciousness, that understanding, that mindfulness of Allah. And so here when Dhunnun al-Misri says فَأَدِمِ الصِّيَامِ, to endure fasting, he's not saying just simply to fast, but to make it a part of your regular habit. And as an exercise, it is not something that is limited to just the month of Ramadan. It's not even limited to the 6 days of Shawwal that most of you probably fasted after Ramadan, but to make a regular practice of your fasting. And the premise by which we are seeking to understand this is not for anyone else's benefit, but our own individual benefit. And Dhunnun al-Misri is saying, if you endure in fasting, it's going to remove some of the hardness of your heart. And we just make a determination as to how important our hearts are to us. That fasting can be adopted in many different ways, but across the board we see that people would always fast throughout the year in the Muslim community. That the Prophet ﷺ, he recommends to us to fast 3 days out of the month, the middle days, the white days, when the moon is at its fullest. He tells us to fast on Mondays and Thursdays. These were days that the angels would report our deeds to Allah Azza wa Jal. The Prophet ﷺ liked to be in a state of higher purification on these days. When the companion comes and asks him about fasting even more than that, he tells him to fast every other day, as was the sunnah of the Prophet Dawood ﷺ. And in our books of fiqh, we have opinions that the scholars, the fuqaha, would say that there were some who would fast even every day of the year, absent the days that it was haram to fast. Because fasting as an exercise was so purifying, and it did so much for one's heart. As an exercise, it puts you in a place where we learn and understand that we don't have to simply just feed our stomachs, but we start to understand how to nourish ourselves in different ways and start to feed our souls. We draw closer to Allah Azza wa Jal through it, and we see that we are elevated in our actions more so than at any other time of the year. How is your prayer during Ramadan in comparison to the rest of your life? Your ability to not only wake up for Fajr, but you woke up even before Fajr to eat a meal. How many nights did you spend praying behind the Imam, listening to the Quran being recited? With your wealth, how generous were you, giving in charity to those who were in need? You don't think it has anything to do with the fact that you were fasting? You think that the action that Allah has told us in His book, that He had mandated not just for us, but for people who came before us, you don't think that fasting played a role in it? Observe a regular fast. It is important. You don't have to be someone who has memorized the entire Quran. You don't have to be the one who stands on the minbar giving the khutbah. You don't have to be the person who is leading the dars. Everybody can fast. It is a beautiful action, and it is about your heart. And Dhunnun al-Misri continues on, and he goes forth giving more advice. And he says, وَإِذَا وَجَدْتَ كَسَاوَةً فَأَطْلِ الْقِيَامِ. That if you still find a hardness on your heart, a kasawa, فَأَطْلِ الْقِيَامِ, then make longer your standing. And he's referring to a qiyamul layl, a standing in the night. The Prophet ﷺ would regularly stand in the night for prayer. He utilized the opportunity to build a relationship with Allah at times when everyone else was doing whatever they did in the nights. People would go to be with the ones that they loved. And Muhammad ﷺ would go to be with Allah. His wife would ask him questions about his state and how he was when he would sleep. And his response to her would be, "Tanama anaya wa la yanama qalbi," that my eyes, they sleep, but my heart does not sleep. He was ever in a state of wakefulness. Even when his body was in slumber, his heart was awake. This is our Prophet ﷺ. The irony of the night is such that when it reaches its darkest of shades, the opportunity is at its highest for our insides to become most illuminated. In those moments when no one else's eyes are on you, and you engage in prostration just for the sake of your Lord, when nobody can see what it is that you are doing, you wake up and you pray simply because you want to be with Allah. You ask of Him, you raise your hands to Him, you turn to Him, knowing that He is the one who answers prayers. He is Mujib. He is the one who hears our cries. He is Sami. You turn to your Creator and you use those parts of the night in ways that you understand they will benefit your heart. فَأَدْلِ الْقِيَامِ, make the standing longer. What did you do last evening? What did you do an evening a month ago? And again, because Ramadan passed recently, or if you've ever gone for Umrah, or you've gone for Hajj, or you've had those moments where you know your prayer is something that is just impacting you. Sayyid ibn Musayyib, rahimahullah, he would say that I know when my dua is being answered. I know when my prayer is being accepted. Because I can feel the tears dropping from my eyes and I feel the goosebumps on my arms and I want to keep praying and keep praying and keep praying. Did you have that moment ever in your life where you felt your connection in that way? Even if it was just for a minute. Did you ever experience it? And would you ever sell that moment for anything? The peace, the tranquility that you felt inside, really being connected to Allah Azza wa Jal. Would you give it up in exchange for anything of this world? More likely than not, you would not. You can replicate this by turning towards things and using the nights in more meaningful ways, rather than the ways that many of us use them, that we won't even remember a year from now what it was that we did perhaps on an evening a year prior. But you won't forget that time when you felt those tears dripping from your eyes and your heart felt connected to Allah. فَأَدْلِ الْقِيَامِ, says the Nun al-Misri, make the standing of the night longer. And then he continues on, وَإِذَا وَجَدْتَ كَسَاوَةً فَذَرِ الْحَرَامِ, that if you find still kasawa in your heart, a hardness in your heart, then refrain from that which is haram. Here becomes one of the most challenging points for many of us, because we don't like to admit that we do things that are wrong. We can tell ourselves that we will go out and do good and do right. We can make goals and objectives. I will read more Quran, I will fast more and pray more and give in charity. But ask yourself, what do you do that is haram? And you don't have to tell me. This is between you and Allah. But in order for it to be between you and Allah, it also has to be you in that conversation. The word insan is derived from the Arabic nasa'a, which means to forget. Inherent within us is the idea that we will make mistakes. We find ourselves in a place where in the Mus'haf, wherever you see the word insan, it's more often than not followed by a description of how we as people will do things we're not supposed to do. Yet we have an inability to be able to reach our potential best because we don't necessarily deal with what we do that is wrong as much as we try to do things that are right. And Allah Azza wa Jal and His beloved Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, they tell us that we have to be able to think of things in both ways. If you took a look within and you were honest with yourself, not self-deprecating in any way, the goal is not to be somebody who loathes oneself, but open and honest criticism that is productive, that lends you towards an understanding of what you can potentially be. What can you do differently and remedy from amongst the things that you should not be doing? There is only one person who is perfect. That is Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And if you believe that you are perfect, you are wrong, just as much as I would believe if I was incorrect. And the implications are such that metaphysically, when one engages in haram, whether or not we feel a tangible impact on it, it is definitely having an impact on our heart. The mercy to the worlds tells us this. The man who would engage people from all walks of life tells us this. The person who shed tears in the late hours of the night and called you and I his brothers above his companions. He said, we who would never meet him, we are his brothers, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He is the one who is telling us that if you engage in haram, every time a black dot, a nukta, will be on your heart. And if that darkness starts to envelop our hearts, it is still the heart that we have that will dictate how we see this world. Let yourself grow in every which way possible. At times it is difficult, it is hard to refrain from haram. Allah make it easy for us. But we see that there is great benefit in it. We have the hadith where the three men get stuck in the cave. Many of us know this hadith. That they are in the cave and the boulder comes in front of the cave and they say to one another, let us make dua by an action that we undertook for the sake of Allah and say, Ya Allah, if we did this for your sake, then move the rock out of the way. The second person in this hadith, he had a female cousin that he loved very much. And he would consistently ask her to engage in an illicit relationship with him. This is in the hadith. And she would constantly say, no, that I will not do this. It is not becoming of a woman to do so. Then they get hit by famine and drought. And this woman, she needs assistance. She needs aid. And she goes to her cousin. And her cousin says, I will give to you money, but you have to spend the night with me. And what can she do? She needs to live. So she agrees to this proposition. The night comes. And he gets closer to her, and closer to her, and closer to her. And when he is so close, she says to her that, be mindful of Allah, do not approach me in a way that is haram. And then he stops. And he says, when he is in that cave some time later, that, Ya Allah, if I stopped for your sake, then move this boulder out of the way. And the rock, it moves. Refraining from haram, such a powerful moment to indicate to us that if one can overcome their nafs, Allah will be so pleased, even rocks will move out of the way for those who can restrain their nafs. The Nun al-Misri is telling us, refrain from the haram, it will be a purification for your heart. Then fourthly, he says, that if you still find this kasawa, fasil al-arham, then establish the bonds of kinship. And here becomes a most critical component for us, because we do not always honor the rights of our families the way that we are meant to. In the work that I do, I see many people who are old as 80, 90 years of age, as well as children who are 5, 10, 15. And much of the complexity that they're dealing with in their internal deals with family that they feel as if they're not treating them properly. In our tradition, the Prophet ﷺ told his children he loves them. Al-Bara radiallahu anh, he tells us in a hadith that he sees the Prophet walking down the street with his grandson on his shoulders, and he is making dua to Allah, Ya Allah, love him as I love him. If Al-Bara can hear that the Prophet loves his grandson, and you and I 14 centuries later know and understand the Prophet said he loved his grandson, then most assuredly his grandson heard that his grandfather loved him. Do you tell your children you love them? Do you give them embraces? In most of the Muslim community, we find that the only time a father hugs his son or his daughter is on the day of Eid, if that. Do you give them the tenderness, the compassion, the gentleness that Muhammad ﷺ gave to his children? Do you treat your wives the way the Prophet ﷺ treated his women? Where Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha says, لَمْ يَضْرِبْ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ إِمْرَأَةً وَلَا غُلَامًا وَلَا وَلَدًا قَطْ, that the Prophet ﷺ never struck a woman or a servant or a child ever. This is direct hadith. The Prophet never hit anybody. How are we establishing the bonds of kinship? Fatima radiallahu ta'ala anha, a young woman who was known as the best of women ever created in this world. How could she not be? Her mother was Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha, one of the best women ever created, and her father was no one less than Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, the best to ever walk on this earth. Fatima radiallahu ta'ala anha had such a close relationship to her father. Amongst the many names that she was given, she was known as Abiha, the mother of her father. They said from amongst the companions, Fatima resembled her father more than anyone else. He would take her to gatherings, he would be with her and spend time with her. Fatima radiallahu ta'ala anha, towards the end of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's life, she is seen by Aisha, and the Prophet is whispering something into Fatima's ear. And she says something that makes her cry, and then something that makes her smile. And Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha, she asked Fatima radiallahu ta'ala anha later on that, what is it that the Messenger of God said to you that made you cry and made you smile? And Fatima radiallahu ta'ala anha, she says that my father told me he was leaving from this world soon. And this brought tears to my eyes. And then he said that I would be from amongst the first who would join him again outside of this dunya. And this made me smile. And in some of the narrations we have, when Fatima knows that she is about to leave from this world, she takes her bed into the courtyard of her home, lays down upon it, and smiles looking into the heavens, because she knows she will be with her father again. Would your daughters be happy to spend eternity with you? Would your sons feel good to spend an entire life in the next world with you? It's important to tell your children that you are proud of them. It's important to tell your children that you love them. It's important to tell them that when they have made mistakes, that it's okay, that you are still there with them and you appreciate them in your life. I want you to really think about this. I had a brother who sat with me who was about 75 years old. And we were sitting and we were talking. He came from Pakistan as well. And he said that in our culture, men don't tell their children they love them. He said, growing up, my father never told me that he loved me. And I was harsh, I was rigid with my family members. I provided for them and gave them a home and education. But I was very, very mean. I was angry all the time. And he said, now when I'm at an older age, none of my children talk to me. My wife, she left me some time ago. I'm so alone, and I realize that it came from the fact that my father never said to me that he loves me. And so in turn, I never told anyone that I loved them. And here I am by myself, and I feel more wretched than anything. It's a simple statement. When the people came and they saw the Prophet kissing children, and they said that we don't do that, he said, what can I do for one who is devoid of mercy? Whose sunnah do you follow? The sunnah of the best of creation, sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Because it was other people who said to him, Ya Muhammad, you are doing different from our ancestors. And if the argument is such that your culture tells you to not tell your children to love them, then tell your culture it's wrong. Because the best of creation told his children that he loved them. Fasil al-Arham established the bonds of kinship. And then lastly, the Nun al-Misri, he says that if you still find this kasawa, فَأَلْتِفْ بِالْأَيْتَامِ, then be gentle to the orphan. The specificness of it is something that we should be mindful of. Especially from the country that you and I, most of us, come from. Where there are people who are put into realities where they have no parents from a day old. A good friend of mine, his name is Bassam Tariq, he just made a film that's called These Birds Walk, critically acclaimed in the United States, where he outlines the work of a man that many of us probably know. He runs a foundation called the Idi Foundation, Idi Saab, many of us know him. And no one in the room, even if we like him or dislike him, would say that what he does for children with no parents is something that is other than admirable. But in our hadith, where the Prophet ﷺ tells us that the person who takes care of an orphan will be like this with me in Jannah. The person who cares for an orphan will be like this with the Prophet in Jannah. You gotta take care of these kids who has no one taking care of them. It is a misnomer that in our tradition, Islam says that adoption is haram. You cannot assume the natal identity of one. A child is always the child of their parents. But to use that as an excuse to say that I can't then bring a child into my home, and our sharia, our shuyukh are here, you can establish bonds of kinship, make somebody your mahram if you need to. And if the reward for taking care of an orphan is like this, with Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what are we thinking? And then more generally, we understand just the importance of helping those who are in need. فَأَلْتِفْ بِالْأَيْتَامِ, the orphans were not treated well in Meccan society. A society that was based off of lineage and tribalism. It was all about who your father was, what clan you were a part of. If you had no father, you had no bearing and no standing in society. And so much of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's mission was about taking care of those who were in need. What I would ask you is, how is your being a Muslim not something that brings benefit to you, but how is your being a Muslim something that brings benefit to the people who are around you? How do you embody these virtues, these characteristics that are prophetic in their nature? Gentleness, compassion, kindness. This is the way of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. People who treated him poorly, the Prophet ran to amongst his dua was, Allahumma gfir li qawmi fa innahum la ya'lamoon, that, oh Allah, bring your maghfirah to my qawm, to my city, not to my ummah, but to my town, my people. فَإِنَّهُمْ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ, indeed, they do not understand. These were people who abused him and ridiculed him and mocked him and mistreated him. They would pour the intestines of recently sacrificed animals upon his back as he was trying to prostrate to Allah. They would choke him in front of his daughter. His friend Abu Bakr would interject, أَتُرِدُونَ يَقْتُلُونَ رَجُلًا يَقُولُ رَبِّيَ اللَّهِ, that, do you want to kill a man who all he is saying, Allah is my Lord? And he's still praying for those people. What beauty, what mercy, what a character. Do we really represent the ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam the way that we can? I can't even tell my child that I love him. How will I have the love that Muhammad had for creation? Start with your heart. Take a deep look inside. You cannot give somebody something if you do not have it yourself. If you do not have patience, you will not be able to share patience. If you do not have peace, you will not be able to share peace. If you do not have love, you will not be able to share love. And on the contrary, if you have anger, you will share anger. If you have pain, you will share pain. If you have animosity, you will share animosity. If you have hatred, you will share hatred. Take that look within. For your own self, purify that most important part of you. And then start to engage the hearts of the community around you with an understanding that they are much bigger than times the boxes that we seek to put people in. If I can ever be of assistance to any of you with anything, feel free to be in touch. I am not from your country, I am not from your city, I am from hundreds of miles away across an entire ocean, as was told to you. But just because we are not next to each other does not mean that we can't be there with each other. And if this is the only time that all of our hearts are meant to be in the presence of each other's hearts in this world, then I make dua that inshallah ta'ala, Allah Azza wa Jal gathers us all together again in the best of places in the world beyond this one. We are brothers, and the Quran tells us that we are meant to be supporters of one another. So you reach out to me, I will do my best to be of assistance in whatever way possible. And if any of you are ever in New York, feel free to reach out. It would be an honor and a privilege to return the hospitality that I have received here from your community. Even if I can give an iota of it, I will do my best to do so. And please make a special dua for our brother Zahid and our brother Abdul Haq, who have been taking me around and opened up their homes for me, a stranger, fed me meals from their blessed hands throughout the course of the day. Make dua that Allah grants them and their loved ones only the best in this world and the best in the next. Inshallah ta'ala, let us be there for one another in the best of ways. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide us and protect us. May He bless us with knowledge that benefits us. May He bless us with a tawfiq to understand and implement that knowledge into our daily lives. And may He guide and bless us all. Wallahu ta'ala alam wa billahi tawfiq. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.